Good morning. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to make blueberry preserves, and we're going to be using a recipe that I found in the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving. You can find a copy possibly on Amazon or eBay. I'm not sure if it's still in print, but there are quite a few of these out there. So we're going to be using a recipe from the section of making preserves using liquid pectin. This is called Summer Solstice Preserves, and it calls for cherries and blueberries. I'm going to be using all blueberries. I'll put the recipe that I used in the description box below. So we're going to be using 4 cups of fruit, 4 cups of sugar, some lemon juice, and pectin, liquid pectin. So here are our 4 cups of blueberries. I did mash them up a bit. I didn't want to use the whole berries. I thought that might gel better if I crushed these up a little bit. So I've already added an ounce of lemon juice. I used bottled lemon juice that I got from my local grocery store. You could use fresh lemon juice as well with this particular recipe because it doesn't depend on the lemon juice to preserve it. We've got plenty of sugar for that. But anyway, I did use the bottled lemon juice. Here's the 4 cups of sugar. So we're going to add the fruit, the lemon juice, the sugar, all to our pot. I haven't turned the heat on yet, but I'll be doing that soon. In a separate pot, I've got my the jars that I anticipate that I'll be using. Those are getting ready to be warmed up in the water bath because we're going to have hot product. This is the liquid pectin that we'll be using. Certo Sure Gel Liquid Pectin. It comes 2 packages to a box. Also in the box there are some nice instructions included, and the instructions give you general information on making jams, jellies, and preserves. There are recipes for freezer jam in here, what to do if your jam doesn't set up. There are high altitude instructions, cooked jam directions, and then they have directions depending on what kind of fruit you're using. Each fruit has a little bit different variation on the recipe. How to make jelly. So there's a lot of information on this little pamphlet. And we are going to use the blueberry. So it's about the same recipe. 4.5 cups blueberries, 7 cups of sugar. Well, that's a lot more sugar, and 2 cups of pectin. So we'll see how this sets up. I'm also going to be adding some vanilla. This is the fresh vanilla bean that I bought 5 vanilla beans for $10 at my local Costco. It's a really good buy. So what we're going to do is take the vanilla bean pod and slice it like halfway through, because in the center is the vanilla paste. We're going to scrape out the paste as best we can, and I had already scraped some out of this pod, but I'm just kind of showing you how I did it. I got about a teaspoon, I would say, of vanilla paste. So we mix the vanilla paste in. We've turned on the heat. We've got the blueberries, lemon juice, sugar, a little bit of vanilla. If you want to add other spices, you could do that, such as cinnamon, cardamom, whatever you like in with your preserves. So we're going to just mix this, melt the sugar, bring everything to a boil. So doesn't it look delicious already? I really, really love my blueberries. So stirring. Now, if you have a nice heavy pot, that's ideal. A thin pot for making jam is not good because when your pot has thin walls, it's going to develop hot spots and be susceptible to burning. So we've cooked this down a little bit. It hasn't quite come to a rolling boil yet. We still have some nice chunks of fruit in there. Rather a thin mixture, but of course we have not added our pectin yet, and we haven't brought it to a boil. When you're cooking fruit, the process of bringing it to a boil and adding sugar and lemon juice with the fruit that's naturally high in pectin, like blueberries, will help gelling. Okay, I'm going to crush it a little more because I have some really big hunks of blueberries, and I prefer mine to be a little more crushed up. Using a masher is fine. You can use an immersion blender if you like. I just find it's just easier just to use my masher. Okay, we've been cooking this for about 5 minutes or so. It's starting to get nice and warm, but it hasn't started to boil yet. Now we're coming to a boil. It's a hard boil that you really, even though you stir the mix, it can't be boiled down. We boiled it for a minute. Now we're going to add a packet of liquid pectin. Our recipe only calls for 1 packet, so we'll see how that does. And you can see how well it's boiling. Kind of hard to do all this with one hand. I should be stirring it while I'm adding it, but you know, I've got only 2 hands, so. Okay, here we're going to bring the mixture back up to a boil. We're going to boil it for another minute once it returns to a nice rolling boil again. And then at that point, we'll be ready to take our jars out of the hot water bath and get them filled with our lovely preserves. It still looks rather thin, so I'm hoping that it will thicken up. Hopefully, sometimes your jams and preserves don't thicken up immediately. It takes a day or a couple days in the after they've been jarred up to really get a good set on them. So we'll see how this does. And I did not add any water, so this is just the juice from the blueberries with the sugar and a little bit of lemon juice. And look at all the juice that it made on its own. Okay, we've been cooking and boiling here. We've done our 1-minute boil. I've turned off the heat, and now we'll get the jars out of the water bath canner. I'm going to remove these one by one. Now I'm following the directions as recommended by National Center for Home Food Preservation, which is when you're making these jams and jellies, you want to keep the jars hot, so you want to fill them one by one and add them back to the canner as you go, one by one. But alternatively, you could take all the jars out and fill them all at once and return them all at once. But I'm going to follow the recommended procedures just to show you how technically it's supposed to be done, rather than taking everything out of the water bath, because the jars technically could cool down before you fill them. They're really not going to. Now I can test my set with a frozen spoon that I took out of my freezer. It's still rather thin. It does have a little bit of sheeting action here. So we'll see how this does. I'm not too concerned about it because I don't want it to be too firm. I want it to be a little on the loose side for what I'm going to be using it for. I'm going to be using it for baking and to put on top of scones. So if it doesn't set up perfectly, it's not going to bother me too badly. So here we'll fill our jar, the nice hot product, into nice hot jars. And then we'll be putting it back into hot water in the canner. Now I call it a canner, any kind of a pot that you can put your jars in and cover with several inches of water and fit everything in there, can be used as a water bath canner. You don't have to buy any kind of a special pot. I'm using a regular kitchen stock pot. So we're going to fill the jar, leave a 1/2 inch of headspace. The headspace measuring tool has little markings on it. This is the 1/2 inch mark, the second bump. The third is 3/4 of an inch. I don't know if you can see the markings on there. It's marked. All right, so we'll use the second notch. We're going to measure, and our headspace looks about right. So we are ready to clean the edge of the jar. Take a nice wet napkin, clean the top of the jar, check for any nicks or cracks. These are new jars, so luckily I don't have to worry about that too much. I also wipe the area where the ring threads on, because I don't want that to stick. Okay, so we're going to put our lid and our ring. I'm doing it one-handed, so it's a little awkward. Make it finger tight to where it just screws on tight, but not too tight. Back into the canner we go, and we're going to get jar number 2. So I'm pretty much going to go through this with every jar. If you want to skip ahead, you could skip ahead. This will take a few minutes here to fill up the jars. But just to show you the process. So jar number 2, we're getting our nice hot preserve mixture, pouring it in. It really looks delicious. I need to fill it up to the 1/2 inch headspace that's recommended. And I think we're just about there. So remove the funnel, put my funnel in a little bowl that I have set aside so I don't have to set my funnel down on the counter and contaminate it. There's the 1/2 inch headspace. We're good there. We're going to clean the rims and clean around the side of the jar there just in case any jam might have dropped on there. We'll get our lid and our ring, which I have sitting in warm water. It's not too hot, obviously. I can get my hand in there to remove it. And then we're going to put this right back into the canner. There's jar number 2. And we're just going to keep repeating this process until we have as many jars as we can fill. So we had about 4 cups of fruit and 4 cups of sugar, so I'm anticipating we'll have probably 6 or 7 jars. So add our blueberry mixture. What I'm going to be using this for is, as I said earlier, maybe to put on scones. I have some beautiful scones that I just baked, and I put the extras into the freezer so I can enjoy a scone every day. And I like to put creme fraiche and a little bit of fruit preserves on top of my scone. So this is going to be perfect. I could also use this, say if I was making a coffee cake. I could use it on top of pancakes. So just whatever you'd like to use it for. Of course, there's peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, which we could use preserves instead of jelly. My husband loves boysenberry preserves. That's really his favorite. Okay. Here's the next jar, getting ready to go back into the canner, finger tight. Grab it with our jar lifter, into the canner we go. I love these jelly jars from Ball. They have the little embossed fruit on the edges of the jars. It's really pretty. I'll show you the packaging towards the end of the video. Okay, we're going to grab our funnel and start filling. It's a beautiful mix. I love this rich color. Such a nice royal purple. They call them blueberries, but they just look such a beautiful purple color to me. Alrighty, let's measure our headspace. Our headspace is good. Clean the edge of the jar. A lid and a ring, finger tight, snug there. Okay, back into the canner for this jar. Such a good feeling to see the canner fill up with delicious food like this. And just think what beautiful gifts these would be with that lovely jar. I mean, so elegant. All right, let's get the next one full here. It's still pretty soupy looking. It hasn't really started to thicken up very much. Okay, let's see how this jar is. We're going to test our headspace. And it looks a little like it's got a little bit too much headspace. So we're going to get the funnel again and add a little bit more product to the jar. We don't want too much headspace in there, because if you have just the right amount of headspace, that means your jar will be more shelf stable. Too much headspace, there's a possibility you might have residual air in here after canning, and it could cause spoilage. So that's a little bit nicer on the headspace. We've got closer to 1/2 inch. Clean the rim. Clean around the edges of where the rings screw on. Now we're ready for the lid and ring for this jar. Screw it on finger tight. The jar is pretty hot, even though the lid isn't too hot. So I'm going to use the jar lifter, put it back into the canner. Okay, so we're about at the end. I only have a partial jar here, so I'm not going to be able to can this, because as I said, there would be too much airspace in here. So this jar is going to just go right into the refrigerator. Here's a regular lid. We're just going to refrigerate this and use this jar first. It's not suitable for canning because there's too much headspace or air in there. Now these are the jam jars, the package of the jam jars from Ball, and there's 4 to a jar. So I think you can get them at Walmart for like around $6, I believe. Okay, so water is starting to simmer, but it's nowhere near ready. That's not considered a rolling boil. Now, here we are a few minutes later. This is a nice rolling boil, so we are going to set our timer for 10 minutes. You really want to make sure the water is really boiling. You don't want it just simmering. It has to be boiling. Simmering is less than 200 degrees. Boiling is closer to 212. Okay, we have kept our jars boiling for the 10-minute processing time. You may have to adjust it for your altitude if you're at a higher altitude than I am. So after 10 minutes, I've turned off the heat. I'm going to let this sit for another few minutes. We've let it sit for about another 5 minutes or so. So now it's time to remove the jars. This is always the exciting moment in canning. You lift the jars straight up. You don't want to tilt them because the tab is still up. The jar is not sealed yet. So if you tilt your jar, you could interfere with the seal by having product go up under the rim. So you want to lift the jar straight out of the canner. Don't worry about that water on top. It'll evaporate. So just lift your jars straight up and out onto an insulated surface so you don't have any cracking or breaking issues. I'm using my wooden cutting board, but you could use a towel or something like that. Straight up onto your insulated surface. And they all look good. It doesn't look like I had any problem with any jars siphoning. The water looks nice and clear. So there is our 6th jar. They all look great. A beautiful job. We have 6 full half pints, and we've got a little bit more in the refrigerator. Here we have hours later when they've cooled. I've removed the rings. I want to get those bands off because I want to get them washed and cleaned and put away. Then I'm going to check. You can hear a dull sound when you kind of tap the lids. That lets you know that they're sealed. You can see that the tab is down. You can also lift them up by the lid. And if they're properly sealed, they won't give away. So all of mine here have properly sealed. I'm going to just clean these rings. I've washed them off. I want to make sure to get them dry so that they don't rust. So really get into the corners, get all the moisture out of there, get them nice and dry before you put them away. Now we're going to label the jars. Once they're cool and it's been at least 12 to 24 hours, you put the date, the name of the product. We're going to put blueberry preserves. You can mark on there with the marker, or you can use these dissolvable labels, which are really nice. The dissolvable labels peel off and they can go on the lid or they can go on the side of the jar, and you just wash them off when you want to get rid of them. Or you can use a regular label. I bought these labels from Amazon. Homemade with love. You put the name of the product, blueberry preserves, and the date, and then you can store them away. So they look beautiful. They're a little soft. They don't look like they're setting up too firmly. This is the jar I've had in the refrigerator for about 12 hours. So let's see what the set is like on this jar of preserves. So it's thick, but it's not what I would call jam-like. It's still a rather thin product. So I don't know if that's typical for preserves. This is my first attempt at making preserves. So here we are, about 24 hours later, and you can see it's rather thin. It's going to be fine for my purposes, but if you prefer something thicker, I don't know, I think it would probably need more than just one package of pectin. I would add a second package of pectin if you want something more like a spreadable preserve for a sandwich. And here it is on top of my scone the next day. It tastes divine, I can tell you. I've already had some and it's really, really delicious. Just no comparison to products you get from the store. So enjoy, and we will talk to you at the next canning session. Bye-bye now.